Good evening, my name's Liam Collins and this is my assessment 2 for eun222. My group member for my internal quality assurance was Kane Layton, but I'll actually be referencing a video that he had done with his previous group, as our video didn't have any audio and I didn't want to make him do it a third time. So we marked the physics piece of assessment. In this video I'll do 5 things. I'll describe a process of quality assurance that was used internally in eun222, describe a similar process that was used at a school that I had my professional experience. I'll then compare the similarities and differences between these two processes. I'll explain why quality assurance is important for practice. And I'll reconstruct, from what I've learned, some strategies that I'll be using in the future for quality assurance. So first of all, the process that Kane and I used internally was from the week 4 PowerPoint slides from eun222, and this was a guide for quality assurance of teacher judgments. This had 4 main steps to it, and these were 1. Establish expectations, 2. Ensure consistent understanding, 3. Compare samples, resolve ratings, 4. Feedback/feed forward. So 1. Establish expectations was having a clear understanding of the purpose, ensuring fair, consistent and defensible judgments about student achievement, and having expectations about how we would be conducting ourselves in the meeting. 2 was ensure consistent understanding. This was to have understanding of criteria and standards, specifically assessable elements and discernible differences. What constitutes evidence of the standards and where to find evidence in student responses. 3. Compare samples and resolve ratings was mostly what we focused on in our meeting. Steps 1 and 2 had been done prior to meeting up. So we reviewed samples, and this had 3 steps of link evidence in samples to standards using the language of the standards. Compare and discuss differences in teacher judgments. Reach consensus if unresolved, involve another person to reach consensus. Provide a fair, consistent and defensible position for each sample that links evidence to the standards. So if you watch from 23:15 through to 25 minutes, you should have clear examples of how these steps were covered in a meeting. Kane and myself followed very similar steps. So step 4 of the guide said feedback/feed forward. So this is where you reflect on quality assurance activity and outcomes and then inform what future practices might be. So externally, when I was at a school for my professional experience, I had a discussion about what their moderation processes were. They had a different moderation process for tests and for assignments. Their assignment process was very similar to what we did internally. It differed that they met up after they had done all of the marking, as we did, but they compared examples for an A, a B, a C, and a D. They then sort of thought, oh, okay, well, this is how I'm marking at an A standard. Perhaps I've been marking a bit harder than everyone else. They would reflect on that and then go and change the marking on their pieces of assessment. And informally, if they had any further questions, they could, of course, ask teachers. Now, for the tests, their process was quite different. Someone would write a test, write a marking scheme for that and have a work solution. They would circulate this to their colleagues who were teaching the same unit. Their colleagues would be able to comment on it. They would have a meeting where they commented on the work solution, where marks were given, the appropriateness of all of that, and how this was aligned to the unit that was taught. Students would then do the test, and then teachers would mark. They would circulate all of the papers for all the classes between teachers, and they would just mark a segment of the test and do that for all classes of that unit. And this was to ensure that they had consistent marking across the entire cohort, and then once they had done that, they would pass it on to the next teacher until it was done. So they actually didn't, if teacher A was marking question 1 to 3, they would then pass it on. But they actually didn't then go and make sure that a teacher B checked that teacher A was marking those questions in a fair way. So I thought that was interesting. I thought that they would have at least checked maybe three, an A, B, C worked example for that test from each teacher to ensure that they're marking fairly. So that was interesting. So that wraps up the comparison. That was very similar to the process that we had done, especially for the assignments. They followed the 1, 2, 3, 4 steps that we had done. They obviously, in their meetings, at the end of their quality assurance meetings, they're also reflecting on their quality assurance process to inform future practices as we did in ours. So why is quality assurance important? It's important because it's a professional requirement of teachers. So EATSL has standard 5.3, make consistent and comparable judgments. So it is a professional requirement. QCAA also has quality. What does quality assessment look like? And they've got three things of reliability, accessibility, and validity. So if you look at something like reliability, to have reliable assessment, you need to be able to reproduce similar marks, and they also need to have marking guides. So that's strongly linked to why you need to have a quality assurance process. Looking at some of the unit reading, teacher moderation, collaborative assessment of student work. In this reading, it links that assessment is really shown to improve student learning, and one of the most powerful research-based strategies for linking assessment to improved instructional practice is teacher moderation as well. So research shows that teacher moderation improves student learning. So finally, reconstructing what I've learnt to have some strategies. My first strategy would be to know the curriculum very well for the content that you're teaching and for the content that you're assessing. Know what students have actually been taught up to the point of the assessment, so you know what it's reasonable to assess on. Second is to know principles of assessment very well, so from QCAA as well and previous units. And then to be learning the framework of the school that you're at. So different schools will have different frameworks. So when you start there, inform yourself on that framework and follow that framework when you're assessing as well and when you're having quality assurance meetings. Now, always have assessment matrices as well. So have an instrument-specific marking guide, whether it's one that QCAA designs or one that your cohort designs. So be participating in regular reflection on your practices as well, and use a reflective guide such as the 4Rs method. And finally, regularly discuss what your practices with colleagues and what you've reflected on and what you think you can improve on with your colleagues, and also talk about what you think you do well. So that's another EATSL requirement of 5.3, 4, and 7.4 that you're discussing your practices with colleagues. That's my video. Thank you for listening.